The world has collapsed, and no one knows how it started. Within days, chaos took over the streets. Amid fear and desperation, people looted and fought to survive as communication and order disappeared. In this scenario, you are the protagonist, and every decision and choice you make will be crucial. At the end of each episode, you will decide the next step, shaping the course of this journey. Which path will you choose? Surviving the collapse in the big city. Episode 2, B. The Dawn of Departure. In the previous episode, Carlos faced the first signs of the collapse in the city. After witnessing the growing chaos, he reinforced his home but realized he couldn't trust his neighbors or the world outside. The arrival of armed looters at the building forced Carlos and a small group of residents to make a critical decision. Leave at dawn to try to find a safer place outside the city. If you missed the start of this story full of tension and tough choices, check out the previous episode before continuing. Chapter 1. The Departure. The first rays of sunlight had barely appeared on the horizon when Carlos and the small group who decided to leave gathered at the building's entrance. The tension was palpable, but the fear of staying was greater than any hesitation. João led the group, holding an improvised iron bar as a weapon, while the others carried modest backpacks and anxious looks. Remember, João began in a low and firm tone, we stay absolutely silent, don't attract attention, and above all, stay together. If we separate, it will be the end. Carlos adjusted his backpack, feeling the weight of everything he owned, and everything he was leaving behind. The distant sound of gunshots and screams confirmed that the city was far from safe. Every step they took was calculated as they made their way through the deserted streets, with piles of debris and abandoned cars blocking the way. The group moved forward cautiously, but every corner was a potential threat. The city, once so lively, now seemed like a battlefield, marked by broken windows and smoke rising from burned buildings. The smell of destruction was everywhere. As they walked, a sound made them stop immediately. A sharp scream coming from somewhere nearby broke the morning silence. Carlos felt his heart race as they exchanged glances. Frozen. It could be a trap, whispered Renato, the young rebel in the group, his eyes wide. João raised his hand, signaling the group to remain silent. They waited for a few seconds that felt like hours. Nothing but the distant sound of footsteps echoing. Whatever it was moving away. Let's keep going, João said, but with a darker tone. And stay alert. After a long and exhausting walk, the group reached a seemingly quiet street. Abandoned houses and broken fences dominated the scene. We need to rest for a bit, suggested Dona Helena, panting. Despite some reluctance, the group agreed to stop for a few minutes to catch their breath. As they rested, Carlos surveyed the area. One of the nearby houses seemed to be in better condition, with intact windows and a partially standing fence. He thought about suggesting they investigated, but hesitated. The risk of attracting the attention of other groups was high. However, as they considered their next steps, the group was startled by a noise coming from one of the nearby houses. The sound of glass breaking. Someone's there, whispered João, gripping his iron bar tightly. Carlos felt a chill run down his spine. The danger was always closer than they thought. Chapter 2. A safe place? The sound of breaking glass put the group on high alert. They all instinctively crouched, seeking cover behind abandoned cars and debris. João signaled for them to stay still while he tried to identify where the noise was coming from. Carlos felt the tension rise, gripping the pocket knife he had with him more tightly. It could just be an animal, whispered Dona Helena, trying to ease the fear that hung in the air. However, the group knew that the reality was likely far more dangerous. João moved slowly toward the house where the sound seemed to have come from. He peeked through the broken window and, after a few seconds, motioned for Carlos to approach. Inside the house, the scene was one of complete abandonment. Overturned furniture, open cabinets, and spoiled food scattered across the floor. But what caught their attention was the figure of a thin man sitting in the corner of the room, holding a piece of wood as an improvised weapon. He looked as scared as they were. "Who are you?" the man shouted, suddenly standing up. His voice was raspy and he was visibly shaking. Juon raised his hands, trying to calm him down. "We don't want trouble. We're just passing through." The man hesitated, looking at the group gathering at the door. He looked exhausted and hungry, but his eyes were filled with distrust. "Did you come to take what's mine?" Carlos decided to intervene, realizing the situation could spiral out of control. "We don't want anything of yours. We're just looking for a safe place, that's all." After a few tense minutes, the man lowered his improvised weapon and relaxed a little. He introduced himself as Vicente, a local who had been left behind when his family fled the city days earlier. Vicente had been isolated ever since, surviving with whatever was left in the house. "You won't find safety here," he said in a grim tone. "The groups controlling this area are brutal. They don't let anyone be." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of voices coming from the street. Vicente's eyes widened, clearly terrified. "They're coming. If they find me with you, they'll kill me." Juon quickly gestured for the group to hide. Vicente pointed to a passage leading to the basement, where they could hide temporarily. In the basement, the group could hardly breathe as they heard heavy footsteps and loud voices inside the house. One of the men, apparently a looter, yelled, "Are you hiding something, old man? We're going to search every corner." Carlos felt sweat trickle down his face as the sound of furniture being dragged and objects breaking echoed throughout the house. He held his backpack tightly, knowing that any noise could be fatal. After what felt like an eternity, the looters finally left the house, taking everything they found. When everything went silent again, the group emerged from the basement, shaken. Vicente, though relieved, seemed defeated. "I told you, there's no safe place here," he said. Juon looked at the group, clearly concerned. "We need to keep moving. Staying here too long will only expose us more." Carlos felt the weight of Vicente's and Juon's words. Every minute in the city seemed to bring more danger, and the idea of finding safety there was starting to seem impossible. As the group prepared to continue their journey, Vicente hesitated. "I know of a place outside the city. Maybe you'll have better luck there. I can show you the way, if you let me go with you." The group exchanged looks, weighing the risks and benefits of trusting Vicente. Chapter 3. Between the city and the unknown, Vicente led the group through narrow streets full of debris, avoiding the main routes. Every step was carefully calculated to avoid encounters with looters or violent groups controlling parts of the city. The place I mentioned isn't exactly safe, but it's more isolated. It's an abandoned vehicle yard on the outskirts of the city. Few people know it exists, and maybe we can use the buses as temporary shelter, Vicente explained as they walked. Carlos noticed the faces of the group members shifting between hope and exhaustion. Juon, ever vigilant, occasionally stopped to check the surroundings. Donna Helena tried to stay strong, but she was visibly tired. After hours of quiet walking, the group took a break in a small alley where they could hide for a moment. Carlos opened his backpack and handed out some water and food to everyone. Vicente, though hesitant, accepted a piece of bread Carlos offered. "Thank you. I don't know how long it's been since I had something decent to eat," he murmured, looking away. While they rested, Juon took out the map he had brought and showed it to the group. "If we keep going this way, we'll be at the city's edge before sunset. But we need to decide. Do we take the shorter route, which goes through an area controlled by looters? Or do we go around, which might delay us and expose us even more?" Silence fell over the group. Carlos knew that any choice would bring risks, but there was no other option. He felt the weight of responsibility, even though he wasn't the official leader. "Let's take the safer route," suggested Donna Helena, almost pleading. "That will expose us for longer. The shorter route is dangerous, but it's our best chance to get out of here before dark," Vicente countered. The discussion was interrupted by the distant sound of engines. A group of cars was approaching quickly, and the noise was growing louder. Juon gestured for everyone to crouch. "They're patrolling," Juon whispered. "If they see us, we're done for." The group remained still as the vehicles passed down the main street. Carlos felt his heart race. He knew it was becoming clearer that the city had turned into a deadly trap. After the engines disappeared, Vicente stood up. "We can't stay here. They might come back. We need to decide now." Juon looked at Carlos as if waiting for his opinion. Carlos knew that this decision could determine the group's fate. After thinking for a moment, he turned to everyone. "We take the shorter route. It's risky, but we can't waste time. Every minute here is dangerous," Carlos said firmly. The group hesitated but eventually agreed. They grabbed their things and began moving again, now with even more caution. As they advanced along the shorter route, the signs of danger became more evident. Walls covered in gang symbols, completely destroyed windows in houses, and the oppressive silence of an area dominated by fear. "We're almost there," Vicente said, trying to motivate the group. Suddenly, the sound of fast footsteps echoed through the streets. Carlos looked back and saw a figure running toward them. Before he could react, a teenager appeared, his face covered and holding a small machete. "Drop the backpacks now," the young man shouted, pointing the machete at the group. Juon stepped forward, trying to negotiate. "We don't need this. We can talk." The young man looked nervous but determined. "I don't want to talk. Drop everything." Carlos knew the group couldn't afford to lose their supplies. Thinking quickly, he looked for a way to distract him. "Hold on, kid. We don't need to fight," Carlos said, raising his hands. He slowly took a can of food from his backpack and threw it on the ground. "Take this and let us go." The teenager hesitated for a moment, clearly tempted by the offer. But before he could decide, Juon disarmed him with a swift move, knocking the machete to the ground. "Run!" Vicente shouted, and the group started running, leaving the young man behind. They didn't stop until they reached a tall wall covered with vegetation. Vicente pointed to a narrow opening in the wall. "Here. The yard is just beyond it." The group passed through the opening and saw the yard, an area surrounded by high walls, full of rusted buses and abandoned vehicles. It finally seemed like a place where they could rest. "It's not much, but it's better than out there," Vicente said, trying to calm their nerves. Carlos looked around, evaluating the place. It was a small victory, but he knew this was only temporary. The city was still dangerous, and the real struggle was just beginning. Chapter 4. The Hard Choice. The vehicle yard felt like a momentary relief. The abandoned buses provided minimal protection against the wind, and for at least a while, they were away from the immediate dangers of the city. The group organized their belongings, divided the supplies, and tried to catch their breath after the events of the day. Vicente sat in an old armchair ripped from one of the vehicles and looked at Carlos. "It's better than nothing, but we can't stay here long. This place isn't safe. If someone finds us, we're cornered." Juon, always analytical, walked the perimeter, inspecting the area. "We have high walls, but no way to defend the place. And if it rains or gets too cold, these buses won't protect us." While the two discussed, Miguel, the oldest neighbor in the group, raised his head. He had always been reserved, almost invisible among the residents of the building. However, this time, he seemed determined to speak. "I have something to say," Miguel began, drawing the attention of everyone. He cleared his throat and continued. "I have a country house about 50 kilometers from here. It's not big, but it's isolated and far from the chaos of the city. We could try to get there, but it will be a dangerous walk." The group turned their eyes to him, surprised. Dona Helena, who seemed relieved by the idea, asked, "Is it a safe place, Miguel? Do you think we can make it there?" Miguel nodded. "It's safe. But the problem isn't the place. It's the way there. The road could have dangers, looters, maybe even blocked roads. It's not an easy decision, but here, we don't have a future." Carlos, who had been listening attentively, looked at the group. Vicente seemed hesitant while João remained neutral, weighing the pros and cons. Donna Helena, visibly exhausted, seemed inclined to take the risk. Stay here or head to the country house. Both options have their risks, Carlos finally said. He knew everyone was waiting for his opinion, even though, technically, he wasn't the leader. Vicente crossed his arms. I've heard that the military built bases in several cities, and one of them is about 35 kilometers from here. I think it's worth trying before risking going to Miguel's country house. One thing's for sure, Miguel is right. We can't stay here forever. The city is lost. But the way there could be dangerous, João countered. And if we don't make it, we could end up without shelter and supplies in the middle of nowhere. Silence fell as the group processed the words. Finally, Miguel spoke again. It's a choice we need to make together. Stay here, knowing it's just a matter of time before danger finds us, or risk everything to seek a safer future outside the city. I want to hear more about this military base. I believe if it really exists, it could be our best chance of finding structured safety. We need to consider this option. Vicente gave more details. They say the government and the army set up these resilience centers around the country to give basic support to people. Some say they have power, food, medicine, and the military keeps watch to prevent looting and chaos. But I've also heard that some groups are taking advantage of this to send people to fake posts, a trap to catch the unwary. Carlos looked at the group, took a deep breath, and said, "Think carefully. We need to make this decision calmly, but quickly. The city won't wait for us." While everyone thought, João considered leaving with Vicente for the base, as it represented a chance for communication and protection. Ignoring the fact that it could be a trap, he devised a plan in case everyone decided to leave at dawn. However, in the looks of the people, it was possible to see disbelief and mistrust in Vicente's words. The group's fate now depends on you. Stay in the yard temporarily and try to reinforce the place to buy more time and plan carefully. To do this, click the left card or head to the military base. And if things go wrong, go to Miguel's country house, facing the dangers along the way in search of safer shelter. To do this, click the right card. Leave your choice in the comments. And find out in the next episode what happens to the group.